Welcome to Rock That Relationship, a podcast about all things relationship with Corey and Tracy.
Now let's get real and start creating relationships that rock.
Welcome to Rock That Relationship. We are back here at season 3, just moving quite along with all of these great episodes on healing and what to do during your healing process after a breakup. Tracy and I are excited about today's topic because this is one that is really an important one to think about. It's that space between breaking up and maybe being on your own entirely and kind of that self-love piece, or even repartnering altogether. What do you do during the healing process to gain clarity and determine expectations for how you want to move forward, particularly in another relationship in the future or what you're looking for in a future partner? Sometimes what happens is we're in relationships and we might have something in that relationship or with that partner that we really like, we enjoy. That's part of, what makes us drawn to that person to begin with. And we know that that's important for our next relationship. We want to find somebody or a situation that emulates those previous partnerships. But we also have situations where maybe we didn't have something in a past relationship and we say, yikes, I want to make sure that I have that in the future, and I'm gaining clarity over why that's important to me. So what we're going to talk about in this episode really is this idea of that healing time and how we go about clarifying our needs and expectations for moving forward in future relationships. So Tracy, I'm going to get us kicked off because I think this is a really important question for us to consider as we launch right into this is, what is one thing you've come to realize that's important to you to have in a partner? Because maybe you had it before, and you want it in the future. So it could have been all of your past relationships or some of the most recent ones, but you say, I had that and I really want to make sure that I have that again in the future. We call those like the must-haves. What are your must-haves?
Must-haves. I think an intellectual connection, that's vital. And I don't think I'd be attracted to someone without that. And care about the environment and animals. That's definitely a must-have. I haven't always had it, but I've had it in some relationships and it's made everything go much smoother. Those are like real key things for me.
Yeah. Well, and that's really good to know that you were able to kind of come to that place and figure that out and know that you had it in the past. So when you say something like care about environment and animals, does that mean like care about like your pets, or does that mean like they care about like sustainability in just the environment at large?
All of the above. Check. I have pets and my pets are like my babies. And so that's obviously very important to me. And, I'm a vegan, I'm an environmentalist, I'm, a lawyer. So all these things I like. I need somebody who's willing to engage on those issues. And when you're very, if you're really diametrically opposed to someone, it's very difficult to like talk about your passions. I guess somebody who can embrace my passions, I can embrace their passions. To have a equal respect for each other's passions, I think is important.
Yeah. Well, and it also sounds like some alignment there too, that you do have, maybe you have your own passions about different things, but you do share some passions, and maybe one being the environment.
Like supporting each other,
right.
I think, you get that, but what's your absolute must-haves?
I have to be with someone who's active and committed to wellness. So I've had that in my last several relationships where, the person I was with would go hiking with me, would go, on a bike ride. They would just go out and do stuff. We did 5Ks. I think I've done some type of a race or something with, the last, couple partners. But also like committed to wellness. I'm not a vegan, but I'm a vegetarian. I try to eat like a lot of vegetables. I know people who are like completely afraid of vegetables. That's not me. Mm-hmm. My past partners have all been, my most recent ones, my more serious ones have all been vegetarian. They eat really healthy. They, they just kind of have a well and fit life where they're committed to that. And that's really important to me.
But does it matter that they do the same things that you do, or is it that they're doing like, what if they were a windsurfer? Well, not here in Arizona, but let's say they were
sand surfer, maybe.
Yeah. Like something, let's say not hiking, not biking. Like what if they were totally into weightlifting and, something you don't do? How would you feel about that?
I think it would be great. It's interesting. My current partner and my previous one were runners. They enjoyed running, and I only run when I'm chased. So we definitely were very divergent on that point. And I like things like tennis, softball, and, and basketball, and some of my other partners, that wasn't as what they were into quite as much, but we found some common ground. So we were able to have active lifestyles independent of each other, but then we're able to cross over and say, what do we have in common? And with my past 3 partners, including my current one, we all really, really enjoy hiking. And so that's like the kind of the common ground that we've come to. So I think it's important for me to have that person have some type of activity that they enjoy. And it doesn't have to be one that I enjoy, but I do like that there is something we can come together on.
It's so interesting because you know how into hiking I am. And it's like, it doesn't matter to me, the hiking part. Well, maybe because I have tried to get somebody into that and they totally weren't, and it didn't go well. So now I'm just like, that doesn't matter to me. The active and, good lifestyle, like healthy lifestyle is very important, but it no longer matters to me, like what activity, because I just need to do my own thing. That's what I've realized. I guess there's the must have, the space to do your own thing. I like to hike by myself, and I hike with you and just very few other people, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and and that's so interesting. And that's the cool part about this process when we're, thinking about healing and getting clarity on what we want in the future is to say, in your case, you can say, I want someone who's active, but I don't have to hike with them. And I say, I want somebody who's active and I want them to hike with me. And, both of those are okay because we've gained the clarity to know what it is that we want in the future. But okay, let me flip it around the other way. What's one thing you've come to realize that's important to have in a partner because you maybe didn't have it in the past? And you're like, oh, I definitely, the next time around, I'm going to have this, or on the flip side, I'm never doing that again. Do you have any of those where you're like, absolutely, this next time around, I'm going to have this?
Yes. And they're kind of the same as the other ones, but except for I've always had an intellectual connection with everybody that I've dated because I don't think I could get past that if I didn't. But, I'm not doing a non-sporty person again. I'm not doing a person who doesn't want to be out there doing stuff, and because I hike the way I hike, there's very few people that enjoy that. You do, but that's about it. So that one, I don't care whether they want to hike with me or not. And then, I cannot do somebody who won't process with me or isn't interested in like a securely attached relationship. And it doesn't mean that they have to be like in a place of secure attachment when we meet, but at least interested in that and interested in why, which is funny because I never used to be that person. I was the polar opposite. So when you say like, I'm never doing that again, part of it is I don't want to be that way again. Like part of it is about me being different,
Yeah. Right. Well, now you're seeking out that which you weren't, not even that which you didn't have, which is really interesting.
I mean, and I think there are certain people who I haven't spoken to about this. I've spoken to several exes about it, and they're very happy that I've apologized and that I've changed my ways. And then there's one that, was my ex-wife, very instrumental in getting me to understand that, but I couldn't understand it while we were married. And I think she'd be surprised to hear my understanding of it now and my desire for that. Like it's a lot of my desire for that is based on looking back and seeing how I behave. And I'm, not happy with how I was. I'm not a person who regrets stuff. So I didn't know any better. And it's like when she was trying to explain this stuff to me, I just couldn't sink in. And so now I see that, and I see like the person doesn't have to come to you they're doing all the things I want them to do, but at least be willing to listen to you and understand why those things are important. And I think I've done not enough, like I'm not obviously a therapist, but like I've studied this now a lot to really understand it and see why it's so important.
And want that other person that you're with to also, maybe they don't know as much about it, but that they're open to learning and open to exploring their attachment style perhaps, and wanting to process with you.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. Particularly it makes sense because that's part of your healing process between a couple different relationships, as you just referenced. And the fact is that you were able to reference your own behavior with your own expectations and the things that you've had in the past with other partners. So you have all these things kind of converging, and it makes absolute sense. I think for me, and we talked about this a little bit in season 1, is I'm like an uber extrovert. I'm kind of off the charts, and I'm an extrovert in 2 ways. One is I like to externally process, which means that I often think and talk at the same time, which kind of gets me in trouble sometimes. But I will always preface like a work meeting with, I'm going to make a lot of suggestions, many of them, which I will not end up liking after they come out of my mouth. So, so that's part of it, is my external processing. But the other part of it is that I'm also a social person, and I get energy by being around other people. So being, having a long day at work or something, and people say, hey, do you want to go or go out to dinner? And I'll say, absolutely, because that to me energizes me. I have been with someone who was on a very, very, very strong end of extroversion. And that was in some ways fulfilling, but might have swung the pendulum really, really far, because that was right after I was in a relationship with an introvert. And, being with an introvert was really interesting. We processed differently. I needed to externally process, and she would internally process. But for me, it was the time it took, right? We'll talk about it tomorrow. And I couldn't handle that. I literally could not come to grips with it. And I'd get into a tailspin. And then after like a long day, I'd want to go out and do something. And, she would want to stay home and read a book. And did
it bug you to did you go out and do stuff then on your own or with other people, or did you curb your own behavior and then sit there in resentment?
The first decade I curbed my own behavior and sat there in my resentment because I really wanted to experience those things with her, and that wasn't an option. And so then I ended up, making friends, and then I went out and I experienced those things with other people, which led me to a great amount of guilt, because I really wanted to have those experiences with her. And so
guilt, did she guilt you, or did you guilt yourself?
I guilted myself 100%.
Did she care that you went out and did stuff?
Nope, not even a little bit. But I felt bad because I was having all of these profound experiences that I wanted with her. I was having them with some other people, right? And it was great that I was having these experiences, but I felt that it detached me from her. She ended up over the years not really being my go-to for things, because she had expressed for so long that she wasn't interested, and it worked for her, but it didn't work for me, because I created this kind of pseudo life, an extrovert's life along the side. And then whenever I needed to process and she wasn't interested in processing, I would end up processing with other people. So I felt like I had like a little bit of a dual life, and I had 2 choices. I could curb my behavior, right? And compromise, or I could go out and find it somewhere else. And both of those things didn't work for me. They just didn't. I spent a long time trying to do that. And it's not that I won't be with an introvert. It's not necessarily it. It's not like a hard and fast. But I want to be with someone who's more like me when it comes to external processing. They're more open to having conversations. I want to be with someone who's more interested in being social rather than maybe staying home and in kind of a quiet night in all the time. Because I've done it before, and it didn't work for me. It just didn't work for me. I felt either path I chose, it just didn't work. So for me, it doesn't have to be like I said, an off the charts extrovert, but someone who's just more on the extroverted side fits better with what I'm looking for.
That makes total sense. It's good that you know that, you can get to that place. Did you have to really sit there and think about it, or was it so clear to you? Because I know the one relationship you're talking about, the introvert, that lasted a long time. That was a long-term relationship, So were you stewing in your own resentment for a long time, and then you're like, I can't live like this,
I mean, it wasn't the cause of our breakup, but after we separated, I was able to very easily look back and look at the incompatibility of that. And that's why when I went into my next relationship, I was like, the very first thing on my list was to find an extreme extrovert. And so that was an important thing for me at the time. Now, since then, I've also been able to kind of manage that and mitigate it a little bit in the middle and say, okay, now that I've had both, I can kind of, now I'm in, I was in another healing process and was like, okay, what do I really want? Like how important is that? And kind of on the pendulum, where does that fall? And so that gave me more clarity. So it's like I had one sense of clarity after one breakup, and then kind of built on that after another breakup, and kind of came to where I am now.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, all this stuff is interesting that we talk about, isn't it?
Do you want your friends to be that also? I mean, does this apply outside of your relationship? Because can you have friends that are less extroverted, or is that difficult too?
Um, I think it matters a little tiny bit less, but if I were to
Mm-hmm.
look around at who the people are that I talk to the most and have the closest relationships with by virtue of the fact that we talk a lot are probably most of my extroverted friends. They're also more
Mm-hmm.
likely to hang out with me because they're out being social. So I think just by that circumstance, I
Mm-hmm.
become closer to them. It isn't any kind of an expectation though. And I do have
Right.
many lovely friends who are introverts, and introverts are wonderful people. I think though in a partnership for me, that's where it created just some dissonance. But I'm not so sure that it would create that kind of dissonance in a friendship.
But I think I said the same thing too about extrovert. I need to be with an extrovert,
Yeah.
because I have been with two introverts, and I think I just got on their nerves all the time.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? I was
Yeah.
constantly on their nerves, and yeah, it like made me feel bad. Like, sorry, this is the way I am. And that external processing, some people do not like it. I mean, some people can tolerate it, but then there are some people who straight up don't like it. And I think
Right.
when after this last breakup, I did say, "Oh my, have to be with an extrovert. I just need to be," because it's not that I don't go out as much as you do. I mean, maybe. I mean, we do different things when we go out, but like, I want to be able to just do whatever I want to do, and I can't imagine being like hemmed in like by someone not wanting to go out and do stuff like or I mean I like to stay home, watch Netflix, I'm like that, but not all the time. Or if something comes up, I don't know, that's very interesting, but I think I did say got to be with an extrovert,
Yeah.
just
Right. Well,
somebody also who's not like who's you can go to a party with and every both people can hold their own, you know.
yeah. Well, that makes sense too, because, as we talk about this is what I didn't have and I want it in the future. I know that you've had experiences with introverts and, maybe going, wanting someone more extroverted. And, and I think about, like even when you're talking about finding someone who likes to process, that's important to me too. So it's this healing process is being able to sit with it and say, okay, I didn't have that quite the way that I wanted it the last time. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this person. It's just
Right.
when it comes to compatibility, does that fit for what I want? Right. And when we look at things like these must-haves, the ones that we've had all along and we want to keep having, and then these I'm never doing that again, or, we're kind of looking back and saying, I want something that I haven't had or haven't had in a while. That kind of makes up our larger list of what we call a no-go list. If I don't have these things moving forward, it's kind of non-negotiable, right? Either I've had them or I didn't and I want them, but it's non-negotiable. So we call that our no-go list. And, the no-goes are, it's really important to identify what those are. And during that healing time is a perfect time to realize that, because oftentimes we'll get into a relationship and we're trying to navigate our no-goes right while we're living our relationship. And that will absolutely happen. But the healing time is a really great opportunity to reflect and say, okay, I just need to be very clear about what I want moving forward.
I see. That is smart.
Well,
What are your no-goes?
Well, here's the thing. So, when we actually just, to be transparent to our listeners, we actually recorded this episode the other day, and we ended up talking about our no-goes right at this part where we were talking about what our no-goes were. And we ended up spending the entire time pretty much, sharing our no-goes and then critiquing each other's no-goes, because we had very different ones. And we went back and forth, and we got off the recording and I listened to it and I was like, what did we just do? Right. The whole point of this episode is really to say your no-goes are just as important as mine, and they might not be the same. And that's perfectly normal, and that's perfectly okay. And that's to be expected. And there's not really one right answer for anything. And that we should be supportive when people have clarity about their no-goes, not critiquing them. And so we did decide to re-record this because we weren't modeling at all what we were trying to talk about in the episode.
Well, and I have to say that I think that was very good of us. Like, I know there was some tension about it and we talked it through. And rather than letting this be like something that either got between us, started a fight, or we're like, we're wrong. Like, we learned from that, right? Like this process even helped our own relationship because we were doing that to each other and not even realizing it. I mean, until you listen to it afterwards, like, we were basically invalidating everything that was coming out of the other person's mouth. And I think that's a really good relationship lesson. We didn't mean it. We didn't mean to be mean or anything. And we were just having discussion, but that's part of relationship that we don't need to get, like, that's not going to cause a rift between us. And we can say, stop. We got to back up. Let's recognize what we just did and then just move forward without anger or resentment, because we clarified, what are we wanting out of this? Is it every time you say something, I'm going to rip it apart, or vice versa?
Right. And well, especially on this topic too, because, when it's interesting, when I've been in a situation, and you and I've had these conversations right after, one of my breakups, where I told you, I'm like, I absolutely do not want this in my next relationship. And, you've come to me with like, that's interesting. Why, how did you come to that conclusion? Why do you believe that? And that felt supportive to me as a friend. And I think about when we show up for each other, it takes a lot of time sometimes, or a lot of energy, or a lot of thought to figure out what these no-gos are for ourselves. And then when we disclose them to other people, the last thing we need is just someone to be unsupportive or critique that. I mean, it might not be something that's important to one person, but it's definitely important to another. So I just think it was an interesting lesson for us, that how easy it is, even when we do this work and we talk about being really intentional about how easy it was for to slip into an unproductive exchange. And so we, would encourage all of you all listening to be vulnerable with sharing your no-gos, but also making sure that you're not critiquing other people's, and that, if other people start critiquing yours, just, be very clear about your expectations and, wanting support rather than critique, especially with a process as vulnerable as this.
Yeah. And some people can like critique or handle critique. And I know for me, there's a difference in kind of personalities. And I think being a lawyer, like, I like to really, like, my friends, somebody I was dating or married to once said, like, oh, well, your friends, I'll just back you up. I'm like, well, clearly you've never talked to my friends, because most of them rip me apart all the time and tell me what I'm doing wrong. And for me, that's great, because it's like, I need that. But there are times when I have to say, whoa, like, I just need to be heard, or I just need to be felt that you're supporting me. I don't care if you think I'm whack. Like, I'm your friend, support me. And I think that's what we backed up and did. And I think that's better, and that's all part of a relationship process,
Exactly. So, with that said, let's talk about some of our no-gos and how we determined that they were no-gos. So our no-gos are just either the must-haves or the never doing that agains, and saying, moving forward, like, this is not negotiable. I'm not willing to compromise on this. So do you have one, Tracy? It's a no-go for you?
Dogs, must love dogs. I always think I'm not going to have another dog. Whenever one of my dogs passes away, I'm like, that's it. I'm not getting dogs, and I'm going to let this next one pass away. And then suddenly I have a younger one than with the older one. And why do I like dogs so much? I can't even answer that question, but I've been with two people who were resentful towards my dogs, and it made it very difficult. And I don't want that again. I don't know, am I going to have dogs again? I just have a puppy now, so I'll have her for a long, long time. And I don't want someone resenting that. It's a bummer,
Mm-hmm.
And not everyone has to love dogs, and dogs aren't the greatest thing on earth. And I know they're taxing, and they can be annoying, in mine in particular, because they're untrained monsters. But like, just, I have to be with somebody who's not going to resent something that I love so much.
Yeah. Well, that makes total sense. And I mean, I have it on the flip side. I have cats. Well, I have a cat now, but, I want, I don't know that I could be with someone who doesn't like cats, and also who, like somebody who might be allergic to cats. I was in one relationship where, we were in a long distance relationship for a little bit, and then she sold all of her stuff and put everything in a moving truck and came all the way across the country and moved in and said, oh, I forgot you had a cat. Yeah, you're going to have to get rid of that thing. And I was like, what? First of all, it's not a thing, but I was like, what? She goes, yeah, I forgot to tell you I'm allergic to cats. I'm like, this is my pet. And then she said, she said, you're going to have to choose. And I said, you actually really don't want me to choose, because it's not going to be pretty, and you're going to have to take your moving truck all the way back across the country. And then I said, probably insensitively, aren't there shots for that? So, she actually did like an immersion therapy and just basically cuddled with the cat for 2 weeks and sneezed and blew her nose and the whole 9 yards. And then boom, she wasn't allergic and she liked cats. We ended up getting a second one But for me moving forward, I realized, yikes, I better tell people that I've got a cat.
Right up front. Hi,
right up
I have
front.
a cat. Just wear a cat shirt.
Like in a dating profile or something.
Exactly. Put cats up front, which is not unusual for our kind of people. But I would like to everyone to know I do have a cat and she has her own Instagram. So I love cats and dogs. So I guess for me, it's pets and I used to have guinea pigs. Like, I don't want anyone resenting my pets. That's all.
Yep. I agree.
You know,
well, let's take it a level deeper here. You know, I know one of the other things for me that's a no-go is having a long distance relationship, or the alternative, which is maybe having long distance and then moving away to be with that person somewhere outside of where I live in Tucson, Arizona. This is clarity that I am 100% sure of. Now there's other people say, oh, I'd be fine. I could move wherever, but that is not me. And I'm very clear. I've been in long distance relationships before. I don't like them. And I have moved away from Tucson on different points in the last 20 years since I've lived here. And I have done nothing but been homesick and sat in the corner and literally cried the entire time that I was gone until I could come back home. It was like, I was just homesick. I don't want to leave, which that means that when looking for a partner, that person has to be local and they have to want to remain here, at least for the time being. I like the city. I like the weather here. It's beautiful. I've got friends and a community. I've lived here for 20 years. My family is nearby, and
you're just talking about living here. You travel. Let's make it clear. You travel. You're not like, oh, I never leave here, but this is your home base. This is my home base. Based.
Exactly. And I'm very clear about that. Actually, to be honest with you, that's probably my number one no-go out of every single thing, probably even more than extroversion and vegetarianism and all that. I need to be here. I need to be home. I feel lost when I'm not. And so that's a no-go for me.
Good. That's a great no-go.
Yeah.
Because you know it. And I know that about you, just knowing you, because you love this town so much. Those are not my no-goes at all. But, political ideologies, that's my no-go. And I wouldn't even get past, an hour conversation. Like, it just wouldn't go anywhere. That's just absolutely has to match. So.
Yeah. I mean,
there's no question in my mind about that. Yeah.
Well, when you're talking about things that are so deep seated like that, it's really hard to compartmentalize and say, okay, well, you voted for this person, I voted for this person, or you believe in this and I believe in that. We just won't talk about it. So yeah, that can be really difficult.
Because I'm not a person who can say we won't talk about it. You know what I mean? Because I would talk about it like incessantly.
Well, particularly because one of the things you said that you really want is to be able to process with your partner and
have that connection, that intellectual connection, which, I feel that this is all part of. But I mean, that's something I would never even get past, like, just wouldn't happen.
Right. Well, and I think, as we continue to talk about this, it's this idea that, yes, you and I share some of the same no-goes. We have some very different no-goes. It doesn't really matter kind of what they are. I mean, the reason we're sharing them on this episode is to talk a little bit about, why those things are so important to us and a little bit about the history of how they came to be. But let's get a little bit more into the process of it. Like, what helped you determine that these were no-goes? Like, what kinds of things did you either do intentionally or maybe even happened unintentionally that were just like, yes, I am certain this is a no-go?
Well, I don't know if anything I do in life has much intention behind it, but it's just a feeling, right? Like, and I think for me to know that what I'm doing is irritating to another person, and then I know what those things are. And if I were to meet somebody and then it would be apparent that those things would be irritating to them, then I can't move past. Like, I don't like to feel that someone's irritated with me. That really bothers me. And I've been in that situation where, like, it's like the core of my being just rubs the other person the wrong way, I don't like. And that for me is like, I'm not sitting there thinking about it or whatever. It's the gut feeling I get. And I can't move past gut feelings. Like, those things that's how I make all my decisions. I think if you want to talk about processes, right? We've talked about this before. Everything I do is very scattershot. It's without intention. And basically everything I do is on gut instinct. My whole life is lived that way. And you're kind of the opposite in planning. And, I always think, oh, wouldn't it be nice if I could plan, or wouldn't it be nice if I could think this through? And I don't. And so then I kind of act, and then I've got to do cleanup later.
Well, I mean, that's a great point. So have you ever moved forward with someone like, you're like, like, this is a no-go. I'm sure it's a no-go. And then you're like, oh, but they're really nice, or they've got all these other qualities. I'm going to just move forward with them anyways. And then you're like, uh-oh, yep, that no-go was more important than I thought it was. I might not be willing to compromise that. Have you ever had that experience?
Yes, many times. And literally had to sit down. I mean, I'm not saying I sat the person down. They might have sat me down and we said, we should have really thought about this before we went forward. I moved across country or whatever. Like, yes, I've had that many times. And I kind of live that way because I feel like people are, I'm not one of those people that says, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion, don't talk about whatever. I will talk about whatever with anybody sitting anywhere that I see them, come upon them at the bus stop or whatever. I don't censor myself generally. And I don't believe that, people can't talk about those things, and that, people are flexible. They're flexible in their mind and they're flexible in their behavior. And I feel like if I am with somebody, we already have an intellectual connection. So why can't we discuss that? But there have been things I think that I have just rubbed the other person so much. I just irritate them, rub them the wrong way. What is that phrase? Like, I'm annoying to them, and I don't like that.
What about like the other way around? Like, not that they were annoying to you, but like you thought maybe they were going to do something or change, or that you could be a little bit more flexible and open with this kind of non-negotiable, but they were behaving in a way that you were like, ugh, I cannot do this. Like, I can't be in this situation anymore.
That has happened and has led to breakups, that is like either substance abuse or, not taking, I mean, I had a breakup with somebody I was really in love with over a dog. So yes, like, that's been very difficult, where it's just, we've come to an impasse, or, I feel that, like, I don't know if it's that I'm not being respected or not listened to, or that just we have processed it and it's not going to get better. It's not going to change. Mm-hmm. And I guess, I mean, you've called me a hopeless romantic before. I am, and I always will give everything 100%. I may do it in a really messy way, but then you get to the point where you've tried everything and it's just time to move on, because your differences are that big, or mm-hmm. that hard to get past. And yeah, I mean, particularly with my ex-wife, I moved across the country, and then we're like, my gosh, we were literally like, we should have really talked about this first,
Yeah.
But then I had 8 years of some very wonderful experiences. So I don't know, is it?
Yeah.
That's how I continue to live my life. Is like, okay, I guess I make mistakes and I do things that I say that I shouldn't, then I do them. And then everyone's like, oh my gosh, I could have told you, my best friend, you shouldn't have done that. I told you. And then I'm like, yeah, but look, I learned this, and this, out of it. And it's fascinating. I think about this all the time. Like, there's some people who meet the love of their life in high school and they are married for the rest of their life. And, they get that. And it's weird because that's what I always wanted from my life. And yet I've been a serial monogamist. And I mean, 10 people I've been with my whole life, and I'm over 50. But as much as I didn't want that, all of those experiences have been so enriching to me. And I did say, before, like, I don't want to do this again. Right? Like the heartbreak part, but I would want to learn and know another person, and to know all these things, I feel like has added to the tapestry, or whatever you want to call it, of my life,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and as you're talking, I'm thinking about whether I've done this, and I don't think I've ever knowingly entered into, well, maybe one very, very young relationship, but for my more serious ones, I've never entered into a relationship that, where I was compromising or questioning or letting go of any of my non-negotiables going into the relationship. But the different part for me was that we grew so much in different directions in all those relationships, that the things that were non-negotiable to me became of interest to the other person, like moving, or we, just kind of how we would, how we wanted to live our life. And, so we were on the same page when we started, and then, we both changed. And so I still held some of those non-negotiables, and then they became kind of everyday things and requests and preferences of my partner. And then I had to assess smack dab in the middle of the relationship if I was willing to continue on with someone who is now all of a sudden in one of my no-go categories.
Yeah, that's hard. I think that's really hard for a lot of people. Religion, diet, becoming more active and the partner's not, things like that. And it's really, really hard because people do grow and change throughout their life. And so if you're in a long-term relationship and now you're like completely changing and different and that other person is not going in the same direction, it's heartbreaking, but it's like you have to live the life that you want to live and not have those things that are so difficult up in your face every day, I guess.
Right. Yeah. You change away from each other, not change kind of alongside. Well, you talk about being more scattershot and kind of like, you don't look before you leap mostly, like you leap and then look behind. Whereas I definitely look before I leap. I'm not sure that it's gotten me any different places than your approach has gotten you.
Right.
But mine's, the things I've done, the biggest thing that has kind of worked for me, or the things that I do the most often to determine if something is non-negotiable, is to imagine myself violating that non-negotiable. Like, what does that feel like? What does it look like? What is the experience like? So like when I think of myself coming home at night to a house in a place that isn't where I live, like in this town that I live in, I might be shoveling snow or I might be out by a beach. It doesn't really matter. But when I imagine myself and then all of a sudden it drums up these feelings, right? And often the feelings are unsettled. They are feelings of homesickness. They are feelings of sadness. And you're talking to somebody who's probably moved 20 times in their life. I've lived in several states. So I'm not like a massive homebody that's never explored the world around me. But I've come to realize that being where I am is really important. And so I sit with that feeling and then I say, okay, that doesn't feel good. So it's kind of like a gut instinct, like you're talking about. My gut is telling me this would not be something I'm willing to negotiate on. What would it be like if I couldn't have a cat in my house? I don't know. I'd be lonely. I work from home all day. It's like, I love having my kitty here. Would I be sad? I get sad. And so that's almost like my gut check barometer. But there might be some other things where I think about and it's like, it doesn't feel as unsettling or negative as I think about it in my head. And then when I sit with it, I'm like, okay, well, maybe that isn't really a no-go. So for me, it's being able to do that kind of that gut check when I'm imagining myself violating that no-go. And when I'm not doing that,
I just violate it and then reap the consequences later.
Yeah. See, I don't typically knowingly go in and violate it. And then sometimes I actually go so far as to make like a pro and con list, like where I literally lay things out. But, there's this one time when I made a pro and con list about something and I had so many pros and I only had a couple cons, and, if you're thinking from quantity perspective, I had way more reasons to say yes to whatever this was. And I looked at it and I just got just a yucky feeling imagining myself saying yes, even though the pros were there. And it was for a job offer and I called and I turned down the job.
Because it's a weight of each of those cons, right? So maybe the pros, they weighed a pound each, but the cons weighed 20 pounds each,
Right. And it was just the feeling I got when I was like, this isn't what I want. And so, it sounds like we both have some different processes, but let's take it to like our last kind of thought here. So, we talk about our no-gos and like how we've come to determine those. And, but what about those spaces where we're just not sures? They're like our unsures. So we have questions that come up for us that we don't have an answer to. So we don't know if it's negotiable or not. So because maybe we haven't, particularly in my case, I haven't really been in the situation. So like two of the biggest questions for me when I was in my most recent kind of dating bout was, what would it be like to date someone with kids? Because I've never done that before.
Even though you have your own child.
I have my own child, but I thought I have my child part-time. And I thought, what would it be like to be with someone with kids, particularly small kids, right? That might need a babysitter and all that stuff. And I've kind of been there and done that, but that's fine too. Maybe I wasn't really hung up on that. I was really hung up on the part where I might be living with someone and we have their kids full-time, but I only have mine part-time. How would I feel about creating relationships with these kids that maybe were more day-to-day than my own? How would my child feel about that? And I don't have an answer to it. I didn't come up with a yes, I would date someone with kids or no, I wouldn't, but it made me think through a lot.
And did you discuss that with any potential future partners? I have a child. How do you feel about that? Like, I'm not
Yes.
going to want another child, and I have this child and it's my child and it's a part-time, gig for, how many
Yeah.
years we're going to be together.
Well, and I have every single person that I had
Mm-hmm.
any kind of serious discussion with was,
Mm-hmm.
how do you feel about me having kids? And actually, there was only one person that I had an interest in, a kind of a fleeting interest in, who had a child. And so we did talk a little bit about that, but everyone else didn't have kids. And so the question would be like, what would it be like to date someone who doesn't have kids? Or what would it be like to date someone who doesn't want kids?
Mm-hmm.
Do I invest in them hoping that they're going to like my kid after a while? Or do I just walk away? Maybe they said they weren't interested in dating someone with children because they've never done it before.
Mm-hmm.
Do I take them at their face value for that? So lots and lots of questions to ponder.
And to ask the other person and just be open and talk about it, right? Just bring it up,
Exactly.
and bring it up soon. That's
Right
what
at the
I
very
say,
beginning. That's
right.
That's the thing with all of these, right? All these non-negotiables and must-haves. Like, you don't want to wait until you're 6 months into a relationship with someone to say, oh yeah, by the way, like literally one of my exes, I think she knew that I had a cat, but not like really.
Mm-hmm.
And we probably should have talked about that before she sold everything and moved across the country. Like, that would have been a really great conversation to have.
Yes, and in the end it worked out, but maybe it might not have. But that's like Indian matchmaking on Netflix. You watch it and it's across the board Indian matchmakers. They get all that stuff out of the way before you even have to deal with it. You know what I mean? But you also could miss people that maybe, and this is my thinking, well, I'll see how it goes,
Right.
I don't know if that's the smartest or what, but it's not like I'm younger, I'm looking to get married, to have kids and all that, like most of the people on that, in that situation are. But
right.
I don't know. I don't know, like, do you miss something, or are you going to just be more clear and have a smoother life? And I think with that kind of matchmaking, it's about the smoother life, right? It's about matching up all the things they each want, matching it up, and then you have the smoother life. But I guess I've never had the smoother life, and
yeah.
Have I wanted the smoother life? One, I say I do, but then I don't act in a way that gives me the smoother life. So
yeah, I hear you. For me, I like to think these things through. As you know, I'm an overthinker. I'm a pre-thinker. I like to think about things before they even happen.
Right.
In the event that they might happen, which they almost never do. Here's my second question I asked myself, particularly in this most recent dating bout, as what would it be like to be someone's first same-sex relationship? And I mean, I've been gay for almost my whole life. Like, I've been in relationships. I've been out.
Out, right? You've been out for your life.
Well, yes, but I've been actively gay, like in same-sex engagements. Like, I didn't just have my first kiss like 2 weeks ago. Like, my first kiss with a woman was 30 years ago this year. So I've been out and I've been actively in same-sex relationships for 30 years. What does that mean if I were somebody's first? Either they just never dated, they were like the 40-year-old virgin, or maybe they were in a heterosexual relationship, marriage, maybe had a divorce because they realized they were gay and they came out, or they haven't come out. How would I feel about that? And, I mean, this is where I go back to the pros and cons list, and I'd want to, of course, talk to the person, but I don't know how I'd feel about that. I'm not sure. Do I want to be that? Do I want to be someone's first? Am I honored to be somebody's first? I just don't know. But I think during the healing process is a good time for me to say, okay, hold on. I need to sit and think about this, because if I do have a really strong inclination, I want to honor that for my own self, instead of just saying, discounting someone because they have never been with a woman who may be excellent, or on the other hand, getting into a relationship with someone as their first and then realizing that probably wasn't a good situation for me. And so I need to think through that, and that healing process is the perfect time to do that.
Well, interesting. Both of those questions were things that I said were no-gos for me, and then I blew right by them. I just threw them out the water. I just, boom, in my old days, I'm like, no, that's an absolute no. No way am I doing that. And then bam, bam, whatever, throw that out the window. And my thing is every time, and I process this with like 30 people, like, how do I feel about dating someone who isn't a vegan? And that's always hard for me. I've only been with one vegan. The rest have not been. And I have to get emotional support about it. And it's very difficult. And I go forward with people who are not. And, you know, sometimes there's a conflict. Sometimes there's tension. Sometimes it creates serious problems. Sometimes, you know, it doesn't. And I'm trying to that's every time that's a real dilemma for me. So I seek external help with that.
So so you're still asking yourself this question? Is there some kind of
every time,
like, is there some kind of scale? Like, is it like if someone said, oh, I'm a vegetarian, but I'm not fully vegan, is that better than them not being a vegetarian at all? Or does it really matter? Or like,
no, because to me, vegan and vegetarian are very far apart. So for me, it's like, it doesn't matter the vegetarian versus the non. It is harder. I'm not going to say it's not, but, you know, it's a struggle each time. And so, I don't want to talk about, it's just difficult.
yeah.
Every time it is very difficult. I have to come up with strategies to deal because there aren't that many vegans in the world. And I think, you know, there are vegans who will not date non-vegans, and I'm not that, but it does also cause a lot of problems as well. And it's my thing that I have to deal with, and then I have to figure out how to deal with it without it creating problems. But
have you ever tried to change someone though? Have you ever, like, I mean, I'm not saying that's a good thing.
Okay. People accuse me of that all the time. Okay. I'm always accused of that. You're trying to change it. Just let's put it out there. I would like everyone in the world to be vegan. I would like the entire world to be vegan. So when I say that, and when I say, look, these are the reasons why I think that veganism is so good for us, for the animals, for everybody on the earth, people perceive that as me trying to change them. And I guess just with anything that anybody believes strongly in, it's like, yeah, of course I want everyone to change. Am I trying to force them? I mean, I've never, except when I was a cop, been and had the power of handcuffing people and, you know, arresting them. Like, I've never had the power to change anybody. Never. Nobody, people don't listen to me. Like, you know what I mean? It's, if I could change everybody, bam, I would, but that's not a realistic, you know? So it's hard to say. And that's the thing. I think when you're a strong and opinionated person about anything, not just the vegan thing, I've been accused of that a lot. Like, oh, you're trying to change me. Well, yes, I want what's good for you. I want what's good for the world, whether that's about substances or it's about, you know, other things, right? Health and fitness. Am I trying to change you? You know, that's an interesting thing. I think being an opinionated, outspoken person, that's always going to be a misunderstanding. Like, not that I don't want people to change, but that I have the power to force them to change, you know?
Right. Well, and I think that's interesting because the question that you're asking, that you ask yourself about this is, how do you feel about dating someone who isn't a vegan? That's on you to kind of figure out how to, you know, manage your own feelings, but someone could potentially change. Whereas, you know, the questions I'm asking myself, would it be like to date someone with kids or being someone's first same-sex relationship? Unless I said, ditch your kids and, you know, go out and have a few hookups first and then come look me up. There's not a lot of changing. Like, I have to just figure out, I've got to sit with it and figure out if that's what I'm willing to have. And it sounds like, because you're not actively going to change somebody, you know, that you also have to sit with it and say, can I live with it if someone's, you know, not a vegan? So,
well, and all these things that I said that, you know, I would have a difficulty with, and then I blew by it, because for me, the attraction, and I've not been attracted to that. I mean, literally, if I'm attracted to the person, I've ended up dating them. So in 37 years of dating, I've dated 8 to 10 people, I think. And so if I begin to date them, I'm already like, whatever you got going on, I'm there for it. So that's kind of me. And does it cause problems? Yeah. But I don't sound like I've been that into so many people. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
My best friend would always, like, especially after this last devastating relationship, you know, or the breakup was devastating. Oh, go out and date. You got to date like straight people. You know, you need a date. You can just casually date. And I'm like, okay, no, it's not going to happen. I don't do that. And when if I decide to date someone, bam, it's game on. I'm in it. So it's harder, I think, and it's harder in that lesbian way of how we are generally, I'm stereotyping here, get very close very quickly and end up being monogamous pretty, the large majority, not everybody, but off the bat. So for me, I mean, I'm monogamous day one. So I don't want to see anybody else. If I'm seeing you, that's it. Like, I have already decided how I feel about you. And so I have never had any control over that. That has just, bam, hit me like a rock each time. And so I always, like I said, have to do cleanup later, deal with it all later.
Well, I mean, it makes sense as to why the non-negotiables are things that you kind of throw out the window. If you lead with attraction because you have it rarely, then you have to kind of question those non-negotiables. For me, I try not to even I try to manage my attraction to other people, because if they have these non-negotiable things, I don't even want to become attracted to them. Yeah. All right. Well, this has been another great conversation. I'm really glad that we had an opportunity to record this episode, or actually re-record this episode kind of with new insight, and really a new kind of approach, and looking at the importance of being able to use that healing time to identify those things that you want moving forward, so that you're ready, for when you want to move forward, right? But that you also have some clarity about your own self and what's important, because there's other things that, besides preparing yourself for a relationship, that's important for discovering your non-negotiables. So even, for instance, just knowing that I don't want something, I don't want to move from Tucson, also is a really good clarifying element of my life for my professional career, for traveling, for, parenting, all of those kinds of things. And so that clarity is not just relegated to future relationships, and we certainly don't want to compartmentalize it like that. But, in the context of this podcast, we certainly want to make sure that we're using this time as kind of a reflect and move forward. And so as we say, really thinking about it, we think about that healing creates an opportunity for clarity, but clarity also creates an opportunity for healing. And so they work together in a symbiotic relationship. As you find that you're creating clarity for yourself on what's important, you're finding that you're healing, oftentimes from a relationship. And then as you're healing, you're getting clarity, and the cycle goes, and it's continuous like that. So, again, thank you, Tracy, for a great conversation. And we will put some resources in the show notes as usual. And until our next episode, make sure to go out there and rock those relationships. If you liked what you heard, check out our show notes for resources from today's episode. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram under Rock That Relationship, and go to our website at rockthatrelationship.com for updated episodes and more great information.
Thanks for listening. Now go rock those relationships.